Hello everyone and welcome to today's edition of Liberty Action Network TV. I'm your host Doreen Finkle, and today we are going to be talking about the NSA, that's the National Security Agency, and the recent revelations that have happened with Edward Snowden. And with us here today is Dr. Murray Sabrin, author of Tax Free 2000. And what's the other book?
Well, I'm working on Ask Me About My Ponzi Scheme.
Ask Me About My Ponzi Scheme. Good, okay. I want you to give me a little bit of background about this NSA thing that's come to light.
Well, what I find really remarkable is that we're supposed to be a nation of laws, and the supreme law is the Constitution, and the Constitution has a Fourth Amendment which says that if someone is possibly engaged in illegal activity, the police have to go to a court and have a judge signed off on a search warrant in order to make sure that the police are not engaged in a fishing expedition. Well, according to what Mr. Snowden has indicated in his documents that he's released to The Guardian, that as a contractor with the Booz and Hamilton that engages in intelligence operations, the federal government is not getting these search warrants, but just engage in a fishing expedition where they're just monitoring our emails and our cell phone conversations and telephone conversations in order to come up with something that they feel is a danger to the American people. Well, that's not the way America is supposed to work, is that if there's a threat of someone engaged in either terrorist activities or potential bank robbery or kidnapping or something like that, then the authorities have a procedure to follow. And
Right.
that's what America is supposed to be all about, is that there are fundamental procedures based upon common law concepts and constitutional concepts, that the government can't just monitor anything that we do, but they have to get a judge to sign off on these things.
Right. Now, the name of the program that we're talking about is called Prism, and that's the one in which the NSA had gotten records from the telecommunications company like Verizon and AT&T, and also from your internet service provider, Microsoft, Facebook, you name it. And from those internet service providers, they also were able to get a hold of your email addresses and follow you in the chat network and whatnot. And so let me ask you this. Do you think that Snowden, what he did was the right thing?
Well, he was basing his decision to release this information on his conscience. And after all, America was founded on religious freedom, which is basically you have the right to worship the way you want on the principles that you believe in. So America was founded on the principle that we have the right to express our conscience in society. And so what Snowden did, and remember, he took two oaths. One is to keep these secrets secret, and the other is to uphold the Constitution. So
Right.
if you have something where he felt was in conflict with his oath to uphold the Constitution, he decided to go public with some of these revelations. And that's a very heroic thing to do, is to say, I've seen things that violate the law by people who are sworn to uphold the law. And that puts him in a dilemma. And I'm sure there have been other people in his situation where they've kept quiet, and the government has continued to engage in spying on American citizens without due process or without getting the proper authority from a court. So Snowden, to some people, is a real hero because he essentially has given up his life to some degree, to a large degree, because he's no longer in the United States. He has no contact with the outside world because he's now held up in a Moscow airport trying to figure out where he's going to get asylum, because if he comes back to the United States, who knows what will happen to him, because the government has not looked too kindly upon his revelations. So there are other people who think he's a traitor, and that's kind of interesting to think that he's a traitor, because we're not at war. There's been no declaration of war. So who is he providing aid and comfort to, which is the definition of, I think, of a traitor, someone who's providing aid and comfort to an enemy of the United States. We're supposedly at peace, so we don't have any sworn enemies except maybe Al-Qaeda, who apparently were helping in Syria, which is a real irony, since they're the ones that presumably are planning attacks on America, but yet we're helping them try to overthrow the Syrian government. But having said that, Snowden is doing something that very few people have the courage to do, which is to let the world know that our government is engaging in unlawful activities.
Right. Now, according to the NSA Director, whose name is General Keith Alexander, he states that this particular program has prevented over 50 potential terrorist attacks, and he's saying that's on a worldwide basis. So the question is, do we believe him?
Well, he hasn't provided any evidence for that. It's always easy to say something that you're unwilling to provide evidence for. So it's hard to take what government officials are now saying with any sort of credibility, because they haven't been truthful to the American people. They've kept this a secret. They haven't told members of Congress in open forums about this. It's all been hush-hush. And so if anything that the American people want, and President Obama said he was in favor of when he was a candidate in 2008, is transparency in government. This is certainly not transparency in government. After all, we're all adults here. If there are attacks that are being planned, obviously you don't want to reveal everything that you know, but certainly there's no need to go after all the American people, just as at the airports we're all considered suspects, which is ludicrous, where we have to go through this screening process, which makes no sense, because not everyone is affiliated with a terrorist group.
Right. So should the average American citizen now be concerned? Because now, here it is, all of us have cell phones, okay? Who knows who has your cell phone number now?
Well, this is the thing about why privacy is such an important American value. And let's step back. I mean, once we got these federal income tax and state income taxes, the government could pry into all our financial records. They can know everything about our life, because when we file a tax return, there's a lot of information about our activities, our charitable contributions, our real estate taxes, our investments that we make, where we bank, and so on and so forth. And so our life is an open book to the government. And we have to remember, the American Revolution was fought because of the British Crown invading the American people's privacy, getting warrants without proper authority. And so what we're seeing is essentially the same reason that America was founded, to keep us safe in our homes and our papers. That's what it says in the Declaration of Independence. And that there's a procedure that the government officials have to follow in order to get information about us through search warrants. And today, with the internet and telecommunications,
Right.
We have to be doubly aware, because they have the ability to monitor our telephone calls, our emails, see where we're surfing on the internet. And if there's anything that the American people are supposed to cherish, is their privacy. And when I hear people write, or when I see people write letters to the editor saying they don't mind that the government is monitoring their telephone conversations or has access to them, I would ask them, would they mind if the government put videos in their bedroom and see what people are doing in their bedroom? I mean, we would consider that outrageous. So why isn't it outrageous that that the government is monitoring our cell phones? There's no difference between the two. It's an invasion of our privacy.
So then I thought that when you sign up for your cell phone and, with your service provider, that's your phone number.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody can give it out.
Well, I think that's in the fine print somewhere. I mean, no one reads the fine print of these service contracts, because they're incredibly long and no one has taken the time to read them, except maybe some attorneys. But I think if this thing gets out of hand, I think the American people will get very upset about it. They should be upset about it right now. But as long as they feel that they're not being, quote, oppressed by this, and nothing happens to them, they won't mind it. But the point is, this is a cumulative process. If you give the government an inch, they're going to take a foot, a yard, a mile, and so before you know it, we'll have to get permission to make phone calls, or we'll have to have an access code that the government will know exactly when we're making a phone call, who we're making the phone call to, what the contents of the phone call is. And this is not what America's all about. I don't think people expect the government to be our monitor in terms of what we say, to whom we say it, when we say it, and so on and so forth.
So it opens the doors for the government to do other things.
Well, it opens the door for all sorts of nefarious things. I mean, once the government can access our phone calls and emails, there's a potential for blackmail. There's a potential for all sorts of things that the government may say to people, saying, hey, we found out that you called so-and-so, and if you don't behave yourself, especially if you're a critic of the federal government, they may do something. They may be doing it to members of Congress, that if you don't vote a certain way, we're going to release a conversation you had with somebody that maybe you weren't supposed to have that conversation. So there are all sorts of scenarios out there where people are saying, why does the government need all this data, and how are members of Congress being impacted by this? Is there any effort to make sure that members of Congress don't become critics of the NSA and what the government is doing in terms of monitoring our phone calls?
Right. I also want to bring up this other fellow. His name is James Clapper. He's the director of the National Intelligence, and he has confirmed that for 6 years the government has been using large agencies like Facebook to spy on foreigners outside the USA. But he also references Section 502 of this thing called the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. Okay. And he says that there were inaccuracies in the Guardian and the Washington Post stories. So what do you think of his statement?
Well, from what we know, if you saw the movie The Enemy of the State, one of the characters, who's a communication specialist, who supposedly worked for the NSA, says in the movie that the NSA has been monitoring phone calls for decades, not just the past 6 years. And so if there's any accuracy in that portrayal in the movie, Enemy of the State, then we have a lot to worry about, because we know J. Edgar Hoover, when he was head of the FBI, had all sorts of tapes of members of Congress, presidents, and other prominent people. And what was the purpose of those tapes? What was he using them for? So once the government has the ability to, quote, spy on the American people, no matter what station of life they have, the government's going to use it for their own purposes. And we know the government has an agenda, which is to gain more and more power at the expense of the people. That's the nature of government that the founders warned us about, and that's why they wanted to keep government limited, and that's why they had a constitution which prescribed what government can or cannot do. And it seems that right now we're in a situation where the government can do virtually anything to the people except murder them outright, but that has happened also with these drone attacks on Americans overseas. Mm-hmm. So I think we're in a very dangerous period in our history where the government has virtually unlimited power, and that's a reason that some people like myself are concerned about this, because I became an American citizen more than 50 years ago, and I took an oath to uphold the Constitution, and I think I've been doing my share of upholding the rights of the American people by speaking out, by running for office. And it seems that members of Congress, judges, and presidents have been systematically violating their oath to uphold the Constitution. And this is very troubling, because if members of the government can't uphold their oath of office, then we don't have the rule of law, we don't have a constitution, we just have an artifact of a time when people did respect the Constitution. And if we don't respect the Constitution, then all our rights that are guaranteed under the Constitution will be extinguished.
Right, and I also want to again talk about this fellow Clapper, because he goes on to say that the surveillance activities were lawful and widely debated and authorized by Congress. This is in his own words. And the fact sheet described Prism as an internal government computer system used to facilitate the government's statutorily authorized collection of foreign intelligence information from electronic communication service providers. And then he references this under court supervision authorized by Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. And so again, he continues to take the fight, and not see the total consequences, or I guess when we look at this, he's asking for Americans to take him at his word.
Well, if there's anything that we know about government officials, they tend to not tell the truth, which is a very nice way of saying they lie. And they have a tendency of lying, whether it's presidents to get us into war, like Woodrow Wilson in World War I, FDR in World War II, Johnson in the Vietnam War, Bush for the most recent wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. What we have here is presidents systematically don't tell the truth in order to further their agenda of war, and they also lie in order to expand the power of the federal government. So to take any statement by a government official at its face value, I think is really being naive, because I think the history is that government officials have one thing in mind, and that is to get more power domestically and internationally. And this is why what Snowden has done is going to shed light on the activities of the federal government and to reveal that they're not acting in accordance with the rule of law.
Right, and I also want to mention some responses from Congress, which have been mixed. John Boehner calls Snowden a traitor. Jim Sensenbrenner, sponsor of the Patriot Act, says, this is a great one, that he oversteps, that the NSA oversteps its bounds. And Rand Paul's response, he says this: on June 6, when the Senate rushed through a last-minute extension of the FISA Amendments Act late last year, I insisted on a vote of my amendment, and then he mentions the amendment SA 3436, to require stronger protections on business records and prohibiting the kind of data mining this case has revealed. Just last month, I introduced another bill, the Fourth Amendment Preservation and Protection Act. And on June 9th, he says, I'm going to be seeing if I can challenge this at the Supreme Court. I'm going to be asking the internet providers and all the phone companies to ask your customers to join him in a class action lawsuit. That's coming from Rand Paul.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, this is why people think that if there is a class action suit against the government, it'd be kind of interesting in terms of the discovery process, what the government has mined in terms of the data with their phone records, where they stored, how long they're going to store them, who has access to them, what's been accessed, what's been revealed from these conversations that the government can listen into. And so here's another example of government overreach. I mean, to think that in a nation of 310 million people, we're all suspects, is really an insult to the American people, that the vast majority, 99% of the American people, are peaceful people. They don't have any evil intentions. So why is the government data mining on our phone calls and emails if we know that just a handful of people are potentially dangerous to society, whether domestic criminals or international terrorists who are here plotting things? So to engage in a wide net to come up with something is not good police work, because it takes a lot of resources to do that, unless the NSA can do this at a fraction of the cost, and we don't even know what the NSA budget is because it's secret. So we should have a full accountability of what the government agency is doing in the name of the people. After all, it's a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. So let's have the government explain what the NSA is doing. Are they doing it within the legal bounds that was established by the Constitution? And let them follow those procedures. And if they do that, and they can demonstrate that what they are doing is necessary, which is doubtful, because if you have someone who is a target, that person should be the target of the investigation, not cast a wide net over 300 million people plus in America.
Right, and also, how about reopening the Patriot Act?
Well, people who have looked at the Patriot Act said it's grossly unconstitutional because it doesn't follow the procedure set out in the Fourth Amendment of protecting the American people's rights. So here's another example of how government reacts to the events of September 11, 2001. where the government is giving virtually a blank check to, quote, protect us from terrorists. There's been few and far acts of terrorism since 9/11. In fact, some of the most recent events, whether it's in Boston or other places, there's a lot of unanswered questions about who was involved, why were they involved, what was the FBI's role and other federal agencies in this. So there's a whole bunch of questions out there that we need answers for, and of course the government is not very forthcoming when it comes to this.
Right, and how about the telecommunication companies and the internet service providers? Does this hurt them, that this came out?
It does to a certain extent, because then people can start to question, are they really working for us or are they working for the government? And this is what happens when you have big government, is that a lot of these institutions, private institutions, or I should say commercial enterprises, become arms of the government, whether it's the media to a certain extent. If you looked at the Meet the Press segment where David Gregory, the host, was asking Glenn Greenwald, who got the story from Snowden, whether he should be indicted for these revelations. And it shows you how the media are now an arm of the government, sort of taking the position that anyone who challenges the federal government is automatically ipso facto a criminal, and anyone who's aiding them or providing the outlet for that information should be culpable under the law. And so this is why the media do not have a very good reputation, because we have to ask, aren't they supposed to reveal government actions that are harmful to the American people, as opposed to protecting government officials from scrutiny?
How about other countries? Have they been affected by this? Or?
Well, we just heard that the NSA has been spying on our allies in Europe, and that's not exactly going to win the hearts and minds of European officials who...
So they're like the world spy.
That's what it comes down to. And this is what happens when, as Ron Paul has said in his presidential campaigns, when you create an empire. When you create an empire, you want to protect it. How do you protect it? You obtain information about what's going on in the rest of the world that that the government feels may be harmful to the empire's interest. And so I think we have to have a real dialogue, debate in this country as to what the role of the federal government should be, not only domestically, but internationally, because I've made the case, I will be making it in my new book, that we've been at war or preparing for war since December 7th, 1941, when Pearl Harbor was attacked. So we fought World War II, we fought the Korean War, we engaged in a long Cold War with the Soviet Union, and now we're in our war on terror for the last decade and a half. So it seems that we're in an endless war situation, and that's hurting our economy, because if you provide funds for military operations, that's funds that are not available for civilian activity. And this is the old discussion of guns and butter. If you're going to have engaged in a lot of military activities, then you can't have resources going in to provide health care and education and other civilian activities that benefit the people.
So now, what do you think is going to happen to the program called Prism in the future?
Well, if there are heroes in Congress, they'll scrutinize it in great detail, or they'll abandon it completely and say there's a better way of getting information that will enhance our national security, as opposed to just throwing a blanket over the American people's conversations and telephone and cell phones to try to get something that the government officials think will be valuable in making our country safer.
Right, and you just mentioned something. You said there was like a better way of getting information about people or whatever they're looking for without invading the everyday citizen's privacy.
Well, that's what good police work is all about. I mean, the police in the local community doesn't have roadblock on every street to make sure that there's nothing that the person is doing are on the way to a crime. Possibly they may have firearms in the car. So if we had roadblocks on every street corner, or the major intersections, or every bridge and tunnel, commerce would grind to a halt. Well, here, commerce isn't grinding to a halt, but it's invading our privacy, and we're supposed to have a nation where the government protects our privacy, or at least doesn't invade our privacy. And so what the repercussions down the road will be, we need members of Congress to step forward and say, and judges to say, this is unconstitutional. If there is a plot somewhere, use the proper means to obtain that information to thwart the plot. Or if something does happen, you can get the information from ways that don't invade people's privacy.
Right, and there's always the fine line between, I guess, security and our freedoms.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the government doesn't know what that line is right now,
Well,
or they're finding out the hard way.
Well, it seems that they discount our freedoms. They don't think our freedoms are important. They think, quote, the national security is more important, however they define it, which they define in a very broad sense, that anyone may be saying something that could lead to a possible act of terror or illegality in the future. And so we've got to be very vigilant. That's what the founders said. To have liberty, you've got to have vigilance against the government.
So with this happening, who's to say that in the future somebody might not develop technology where the government, let's say they can track you via your phone number, your cell phone number, and if they want to harm you, they can do something to harm you?
Well, this is why there is discussion, or there's evidence that the federal government is now flying drones in the United States. And if they think they've overheard a conversation with somebody that they think may be leading to a crime, apparently they think they have the right to use a drone to shoot somebody on the ground if they feel that this would be a national security benefit. So this is very dangerous, is that they're using ways that there's no due process. And one of the things about America is that there's that due process, that if you think somebody's engaged in a crime, if they're doing it and you see it, like a bank robber, of course you stop them. But if you think someone is plotting, then you apprehend them, and you don't do the judge, jury, and executioner all at once.
Wow. Oh, this is just scary stuff.
Well, it's something that I think people were warning about years ago, is how telecommunications is a liberating force, but it also could be used by the government to undermine our liberties. And that's why we've got to make our voices heard if we don't want the government to undermine our freedoms that are guaranteed to us by the Constitution.
So, what do you think will happen to Snowden?
Well, that's a good question. Obviously, some country will take him in. How that'll happen, I don't know. But right now, Russia is, quote, protecting him by not allowing the federal government to seize him. So we'll see exactly how this unfolds over time. But it seems that one nation somewhere will protect him, because this is part of the humanitarian right that supposedly people have, is to seek political asylum.
Right. Okay, we're out of time. And I'd like to thank you, Dr. Murray Sabrin, for coming on our show, author of Tax Free 2000. And the new book again, say it again.
Ask me about my Ponzi scheme, which I'm working on right now.
And to our viewers, thank you for watching us. And for more information on this show, go to campusteaparties.com. And please make a small contribution. We're not the Rockefeller Foundation, but we are doing research and education. And thank you for watching us.